Welcome to Media Mac. Dr. Shermak here. Happy week one. I'm so excited here in week one. We got the episode 0 sort of out of the way last week. Hopefully it was fun, but that's always sort of the getting our feet planted on the ground episode where we begin to understand a little bit more about how the class is going to work, so on and so forth. This is fun because week one is here and we get to dive into some actual content. And the topic we're tackling today, we're looking kind of at answering a broad question here using something very current and relevant. And that broad question is, what is mass communication? And so to do that, we're going to look through the lens of something that's happening right now. So I'm recording this podcast on the Friday before the Super Bowl, Friday, February 6th. And the Super Bowl is coming up on Sunday, February 8th. So by the time you listen to this, most likely, I'm going to upload it today, but by the time you listen to this, most likely the Super Bowl will be in the books. All right, and you're going to have an opportunity to do some reflection on that Super Bowl. Why the heck are we talking about the Super Bowl in a mass communications class? Because it is a mass communications event. Of course, it is a game, right? The Seattle Seahawks are taking on the New England Patriots, and my football team is not involved. The Chicago Bears lost in the playoffs after a great season. I'm already really excited about next year, and we can talk about this offline, sports fans. Some of you out there listening, since we are here in California, might be LA Rams fans. The Bears lost to the Rams in a really exciting game. But anyway, neither of those teams are in. The Seahawks are in, and they'll play the Patriots. So we're talking about the Super Bowl today because it's an excellent example of all things mass communication, right? Even if you are not sports involved, even if what I just said sounded like complete nonsense to you because you have zero interest in sports, I'd be willing to bet that the Super Bowl in some way, shape, or form is going to affect your Sunday. Right? And this year is particularly interesting because of the political fuel that is pulsating through this country right now. There's the Bad Bunny concert that's happening at halftime, which has gotten a lot of political attentions for reasons both very fascinating and valid and also very silly. And you can decide what side, if there are sides there, I don't even know. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but it's a huge sort of story related to the Super Bowl this year, of course, is that concert. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward today, but you're going to see memes about this. You're going to see, of course, the commercials, the shows, the concerts, everything surrounding the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl, by definition, is something known as a media spectacle. And that's not just a fancy word that we use when we talk about things that might be overhyped or sensationalized. That is an actual word, an actual term in scholarship for media, a media spectacle. What does that mean? Well, it goes way beyond just a football game, right? The Super Bowl is historic, right? It's historic, not just for the teams, but also for the music and the culture, so on and so forth. It becomes what I call kind of a cultural bookmark. People remember where they were when they saw Super Bowl whatever, right? They remember who they watched it with. So you have this real kind of nostalgic feel for it that's etched in your memory. It also has a massive audience, all right? The Super Bowl is regularly the most viewed television program in history. 19 of the 20 most watched television programs in history. And that's really what it is, right? It is a television program. Television networks pay money, big money, to broadcast the Super Bowl because it's programming. 19 of the 20 most watched TV shows in U.S. history are Super Bowls. The only exception to that, excellent bar trivia, by the way, the 1983 MASH finale is usually right up in that top 20, but every one of those is typically a Super Bowl. And we're talking about in the neighborhood recently in the $120, $130 million range, or $1 million. There's a lot of dollars, but I'm talking viewers. 120, 130 million viewer range. There's some predictions that this year's could exceed 140. It's getting more difficult to measure that because we're watching it in so many different ways. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Some interesting characteristics about this as far as viewership goes. Usually the viewership is about 11% higher among female viewers, all right, than a typical NFL game. I also think this is a lot of fun. Only about 0.7%, less than 1% of viewers change the channel during the game. How interesting, right? And I would think that if you're a Super Bowl party, you'd be like the least popular person in the room if you change the channel during the Super Bowl. Don't do that. Party foul, right? Party foul. Another interesting stat. Competitiveness only impacts the ratings about 2%, meaning if it's a close game, if it's a blowout, that doesn't really alter the viewership. People tend to stick with it. I think a big part of that is the commercials. People want to see the commercials, right? And it's just the overall spectacle. A regular season game, if it's a blowout, I'll turn it off. Who cares, right? But I always do remember, though, that one Super Bowl between the Patriots and the Falcons. A lot of people went away from it because the Falcons are up big. And if you're a Falcons fan or a Patriots fan, I don't need to tell you what happened. But if you're not, the Patriots mounted a huge comeback, won the Super Bowl, and it changed the way a lot of people watch forever, right? It's wild if you look back through the history of the Super Bowl. Super Bowl I was back in 1966, and during that game, they gave away about 1,000 media credentials. And if you don't know, a credential is given to a member of the press to come and cover it. Right? A regular season game today, they hand out about 100 to 200 media credentials. In some of the most recent Super Bowls, 6,000 people there covering the Super Bowl. And those are not all sports reporters. And now, especially, you have an influx of like influencers, other media from entertainment niches covering the Super Bowl. So again, it's this massive, massive event. You probably have seen Super Bowl coverage starting as early as maybe Monday of Super Bowl week. In 1975, the total coverage for the Super Bowl was 4 hours and 45 minutes. Last year's Super Bowl, over 300 hours of coverage, and that doesn't even include the game. Okay, this is across multiple networks. So the amount of coverage and what the Super Bowl has become to programming has soared. It's really wild. Halftime. The halftime show has become a thing of its own. Typically, it's the most viewed part of the entire programming day. There are literally people that will jump in, they'll keep an eye on the game maybe, but they'll jump in and they will sit down and watch the halftime show. I am certain, again, we're recording ahead of the Super Bowl here on Friday, I am certain that given all the discussion about Bad Bunny and what is happening in America today, I'll be really interested to see the numbers for this year's Super Bowl. I think they're gonna peak, and typically those numbers increase by about 6 to 10% just for the halftime show when you compare it to the game. Social media. Right? Social media is another area where this goes beyond television, right? The Super Bowl goes beyond television. 6.4 billion X impressions related to the Super Bowl in the last few years. 1.5 billion TikTok views related to Super Bowl. That amounts to about, across all platforms, 4.6 billion views related to social media on platforms. And again, some of those numbers might not quite add up mathematically because different platforms have different definitions between views and impressions. The big story is this. Social media has become just as important to this social Super Bowl landscape as television. And so when you put this all together and you think about the television and the social media. And I haven't even mentioned things like Radio Row, where radio stations go and broadcast from the Super Bowl, the documentaries produced about the Super Bowl, the books made about the Super Bowl. This is mass media and mass communication operating full steam ahead. All right, full steam ahead. So some things about this year's Super Bowl. Again, broadcasting. I'm recording the Friday before. We haven't seen the game yet, but we already know there's a lot about this Super Bowl from a mass communication standpoint that people are going to watch. And this media machine that we're talking about started running weeks ago. So this year we're entering a territory where we are at the $7 million ad. A 30-second commercial spot on the Super Bowl is running for $7 million. And there's some talk that could go even higher. Comparatively, if you think about primetime television, an ad runs for 30 seconds for about $112,000. Okay, so we're looking at 60 times more expensive to run during the Super Bowl. Companies do not spend that kind of money unless they know that the mass communication they're engaging with is actually working, right? Super important. A lot of ad experts are dubbing this year's Super Bowl as the AI and Health Bowl. That sounds exciting, doesn't it? We all want the AI people in the healthcare industry controlling the world. Ugh. They're saying that this year's ad lineup, and we've seen some of these kind of trickle out, and they try to hype this up. I saw Benson Boone, hope I'm saying that name right, super unhip guy I am. He's really hip. Benson Boone and Ben Stiller are doing an ad campaign. They kind of tease that a little bit. But apparently this year's ad lineup is loaded with AI companies and all these weight loss drugs, telehealth services. So it's interesting because a few years ago, some of these companies didn't even exist, let alone would be able to play on the big stage like this, right? Because this stage for Super Bowl is typically reserved for companies like PepsiCo and General Motors, right? Which will be there. They'll be there. Don't worry about that. But now you have some of these new kids on the block, and it gives you an idea of where money is going, where investment is going, because these companies have the money to invest in this massive stage. There's also a lot of talk about the celebrity cameos that are going to take place. There's some talk that Kendall Jenner, Serena Williams, I mentioned Benson Boone, I mentioned Ben Stiller, are going to have appearances. So when you're paying that $7 million for 30 seconds, you darn well better get someone who is recognizable, right? And some of that investment is going to those celebrities. The strategy here by many ad companies is to look at the Super Bowl and make sure that they get in early. And one of the ways they're getting in early is by dropping content on social media. Because again, it's not about the Super Bowl being a single broadcast event. I mentioned the numbers from the 70s and how it was 4 hours and 45 minutes. I don't know, you eat a steak, you eat a mashed potato, the other team wins. Your Sunday is over, you go back to doing what you're doing. This is several days, over 300 hours of programming, right? So, they want to make sure that by the time the game even airs, you've already had a tinge of that advertising because there's so much programming to sponsor. And that's what they're doing. And I think it's smart. This is something that and this is where my media nerdism really comes out, but it's a measurement problem this year. One of the great challenges in figuring out just how many people watch the Super Bowl in this modern era is that people are watching all over the place. The Super Bowl this year is going to be broadcast by NBC. That means, yes, it's going to be broadcast on your traditional, cable and over-the-air, signals from NBC, but it's also going to be on Peacock. You have YouTube TV out there, Hulu, you have traditional broadcasts like I just mentioned. All that's happening at once. So analysts are having a hard time figuring out how to count this audience, right? I think the total number is going to end up being huge, probably record-breaking, but it's going to be sort of a amalgamation of a lot of different numbers put together. So we'll keep talking about that this semester because our media is so fragmented. We'll even get a little bit to that in the second segment. But this is really, really important to keep an eye on it. Another thing that makes the Super Bowl so unique is what I call ritual and deep play. All right, let me tell you what that means. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Research shows that people watch the Super Bowl with a lot of the same groups that they come together with to celebrate major holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas. It's even a family event for many folks. And when they get together, they often view the Super Bowl in the same location as those holidays, even with the same seating arrangements, right? And a big part of those celebrations, of course, is food. I mentioned my big plans for my ribs. Hat tip to my girlfriend, who's an amazing cook, and she's going to make those. I'm really excited about that. I will help out in some way in preparing them. I will 100% help out in housing and consuming those. The Super Bowl is second to only Thanksgiving for food consumption. I found this stat, and I love this stat. I don't know what it means. I don't have a lot of context for it. I'm just going to be honest. But in 2019, 1.3 billion chicken wings were consumed on Super Bowl Sunday. That's a lot of fun. Deep play. Deep play is becoming part of the ritual of Super Bowl Sunday. What is deep play? It's gambling. And we can't ignore the relationship in our world today between gambling and media, right? FanDuel has its own network, sports network. Every sporting podcast, television show usually has some sponsor related to gambling. We have entire networks like VSiN that are out there that are dedicated to gambling. So it's a huge part of this. In 2024, 1.5 billion with a B. That's an insane amount of money. If you don't know, $1 billion in bets on the Super Bowl, with gambling now legal in about 40 states, 40 of the 50 states. So there's not only the emotional tie to the game with this ritual that we do, or these rituals that we do, there is even a financial stake in the game, right? So it's not just entertainment. It's not just entertainment. And rituals are a part of mass communication consumption. We have rituals for when we read a book in bed at night. We watch that favorite TV show on our iPad before we fall asleep. We listen to a podcast on our way to work. The Super Bowl is a ritual just the same, and it's a huge part of that consumption. So you might be saying, yeah, okay, Shermak, we got all that. It's big. It's huge. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of people watching. All right. Let's talk about mass communication. Let's do that. Let's pull the lens back a little bit in our next segment and zoom back a little bit. And when we return, we are going to talk about and directly answer that question in a little bit more abstract way. What is mass communication? This is Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermak. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Stay connected to your campus. The Questonian has been Cuesta College's trusted news source since 1966. From breaking news to campus life, we cover the stories that matter to you. Follow us at The Questonian on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, or visit questonian.com.
Welcome back to the pod. Dr. Shermak here. It is the Media Mac podcast here, and we are discussing the Super Bowl. We spent segment 1 discussing the Super Bowl, and as we move into segment 2, we are going to ask this question: what is mass communication? So why the heck did we spend all of segment 1 talking about the Super Bowl? Well, it's kind of a big deal going on here the Friday before the Super Bowl. But the Super Bowl would not exist as it is without mass communication. It demonstrates the impact the utility, the power, even some of the danger that miscommunication has in our daily lives. And it's kind of all packed into one day or one weekend, or even these days, 1 week, right? So let's zoom back a little bit. I'm going to talk about communication models, and these are visual models. If you are in the class and you're listening, you will probably want to reference the communication models page that's located in the week 1 module on Canvas. That's going to help give a little bit of a visual of what I'm about to discuss. So if you're able to pull that up right now as you're listening, or you want to go back later and take a look, please do, because it will be helpful. So our traditional communication model, the basic model of communication that we engage in every single day, whether we know it or not, is where we have a sender. We have a sender who is sending a message, and that message is being delivered to a receiver. So 3 main components of that communication model: sender, message, and receiver. This is how we talk to each other every day, right? You send a text message as the sender, that text is the message, and that is delivered to someone else via text who is the receiver, right? It happens every day, hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. You don't even think about it. Okay, this is simple, clean, pretty easy to understand. But when we bring that simple model over to the mass communication realm, things get a little more complicated, don't they? All right. So let's think about that mass communication model. All right. The mass communication model starts with the sender, the message, and the receiver. All right. But we add some new elements to that, and we change that a little bit to make it mass, all right? One thing you'll notice, especially if you look at the visuals on Canvas, is the circles are different sizes, all right? In the base model, the sender and the receiver are equally sized representative circles. In mass communication, that changes. The receiver circle gets much larger. That's where we get the masses, all right? That's where we get the masses. So in order to have mass communication, you must communicate with the masses. This is really, really special and unique to mass communication, especially when you compare it to interpersonal, group, small group, so on and so forth. The channel is also included in this mass communication model. And I don't necessarily mean a television channel, although that's a good example. When I'm talking about a channel, I'm talking about the medium through which the message travels. This could be a television signal, a radio signal, a printed piece of paper, social media, streaming, anything. The channel will help shape the message. This sort of gets into Marshall McLuhan's saying the medium is the message. The medium is the message, meaning that the way that we deliver the message directly shapes the message. And that's something to think about. For instance, a news story hits very differently as a 30-second TV clip as opposed to a 3,000-word newspaper article, as opposed to a TikTok. It can be about all that same news story, but depending on how it's delivered, it hits the audience very differently, all right? So that's channel, and that really has an impact on how we deliver messages. The next item is gatekeeper, all right? A gatekeeper. And this is sort of almost like you could view it as a wall a bit between the sender and the receiver. This typically is someone or something that decides what gets through and what doesn't, all right? These are editors, producers, algorithms, platform policies when we think about social media. In the Super Bowl, if we want to bring the Super Bowl back into this, who decides which ads air, right? That's a gatekeeper. Which camera angles do you see? All right, that's the producer in that case of the television broadcast. What stories get covered in the post game? That's probably an editor, right, or a producer. And now, of course, which ads get released early on social media and which ones are saved for the broadcast, right? So there's deciding there too. It's a powerful position. Lots of influence there from the gatekeeper. The next one I think is really interesting when you dive a little deeper into it, and maybe not as interesting sounding at the surface, and that is noise. And when I talk about noise, I want to be really clear up front. We can be talking about actual noise, all right? I mean audible noise, all right? If I'm very quiet in the room where I'm recording, I'm actually recording in the back room of the Questonian newsroom here on the campus at Cuesta College, you can hear little noises, right? If I bang on this table, tap my mic, right? If I rustle my notes, that's noise, right? That's noise. And it could, if I'm talking and I'm making those gestures or those motions, that could distort or interfere with the message, all right? That's what noise is, anything that distorts or interferes with the message. So it could be literal, it could be bad audio, maybe that annoying buffering when you're watching a YouTube video, or it could be something maybe more conceptual, like our own biases. Whoa, that's getting into some stuff now. What about misinformation? That's noise. What about distraction? What about our own assumptions? Yeah, you can see where this is getting kind of complex, right? Think about the measurement problem we just discussed. When the audience is scattered across Peacock, YouTube, Hulu, traditional broadcasts, even figuring out who receives the message becomes noisy, right? This is talking about the delivery of those messages and being disrupted by noise. So let's connect this back to the Super Bowl, since we're talking Super Bowl here on Super Bowl weekend. Think about the senders involved this weekend in this mass communication moment. You have the NFL, right, as a sender. You have the broadcast network, NBC, of course, advertisers, halftime shows, artists, right? Those are your senders. What are the messages? Oh my gosh, it's hard to even list all of them. You have the game, the ads, the halftime show, all the analysis, the commentary, those pre-released ads, the social media teasers, all this hype, right? Those are the messages being sent. And we're getting this through all sorts of different channels, broadcast, streaming, social media, radio, and it's coming at us all at once. That's part of the point of this, isn't it? How do we handle that? Thinking about this as senders and receivers, because guess what's changed dramatically over the years? That big circle that used to be the receivers in mass media, that circle has been made equal by the sender circle. The sender circle and the receiver circle are equal in size, meaning you can be a sender who sends messages to mass audiences. You don't have to have your own television to create a television. You don't have to have your own television station to create a television show that you distribute to people. We can do that on YouTube. You don't have to have your own radio station to send out a radio show. You can do podcasting just like me. I'm just some schmo behind a microphone. I figured it out. I got a website. I got a little Zoom recorder here. I'm sending it out. I don't think it's going to reach millions of people, but you never know. I'm sending out a show, right? Senders and receivers are now the same group. And that didn't used to be the case. There used to be a lot of exclusivity to the mass communication model where there were only a few senders, millions of receivers, but only a few senders. Back to the Super Bowl, gatekeepers, right? You have network producers. You have buyers who are paying $7 million for 30-second ads. There's social media algorithms deciding which of these teaser videos for these ads will be most important and most viewed. The noise involved with this is incredible. You might have your rooting interest. Maybe I am not a bitter sports fan most of the time. My friends might be like, really? No, I don't think I am most of the time. But if I was a bitter fan because my Bears lost, I might say something like, oh, my season's over anyway. Forget the Super Bowl. I don't care. The Bears aren't involved. I'm not like that. I like the game. Would I love my Bears to be there? Yeah, I'd be a total wreck. Of course I would. But I'm glad that I'm able to watch it. You might have someone, let's say you're at the game, they're yelling about the referees, or you're at a Super Bowl party and they're yelling about the referees. You can't watch the game. That's noise. you have a second screen in your hand, maybe a third screen, right? There's some noise there too. That's a whole nother thing. We'll talk about second, third, fourth, even fifth screening later on in the semester. You have maybe difficulty getting the game, even knowing where to watch it. That's noise in some respect. So anything that, again, that delays that delivery of the message. So every concept that we're going to study this semester in communications, in the communications model, is happening in this one event. So that's why it's so awesome that the timing of our class just so happened to land, kind of during and post Super Bowl weekend, because it is the quintessential mass media event. All right? So think about that. If you're listening before you watch the Super Bowl, if you're listening after you already have watched the Super Bowl, think back about how that Super Bowl represented a mass communication event, this mass communication spectacle, okay? As we transition into the third segment of today's podcast, we're going to get in a little bit more about why this matters and how it relates to the broad concept of mass communication, media, and culture. And we'll talk a little bit about what is next. You're listening to Media Mac Podcast. I'm Dr. Shermak. We'll be right back.
Want real journalism experience? Join the Questonian. Build your portfolio, develop professional skills, and tell the stories that matter to our campus. Enroll in JOUR 202 or 203 for 4 credits. Questions? Email the Questonian at questa.edu. The Questonian. Your story starts here.
So glad to have you listening in here on the Media Mac Podcast. Dr. Shermak here. We are in week 1. We are answering the question, what is mass communication? And we're doing that by looking at the Super Bowl. All right, so part of your work this week, if you're in the Journalism 200 class at Cuesta College with me, in addition to listening to this podcast, which you're doing right now, good job, is also to read our first chapter in the textbook this week. That's the Media and Culture textbook. And your textbook this week, chapter 1, talks about taking what they call a critical approach to media and culture. What does that mean, right? I think a lot of times, I found over the years, students, everyone thinks about criticism or being critical as something negative. And intuitively, I get that, but that's not really what that means. It could be negative, but being critical or using criticism, generally speaking, means bringing a deeper thought to the process, having deeper thinking about something. So for media, it's not just passively consuming media, being on autopilot. It's stopping and asking some questions about that media, okay? One of the questions you could ask is, who made this? And that's getting to the sender, right? Who made this? Why did they make it? What sort of purpose is behind it? Is it profit? Is it persuasion? Why is an AI company, an AI startup, spending $7 million on a Super Bowl ad? What are they trying to do? What are they up to? That's being critical. And that's awesome. We need more of that. Who is the intended audience? That gets into that receiver on our model, doesn't it? Is that audience you? What is their intentions in reaching that audience? What's being left out? There's gatekeepers here who are actively leaving things out. What part of the message is being left out? What's being kept in? Why? Which stories, which voices, which products get the spotlight and which don't? And why is that? That's being a critical listener and a critical reader and a critical viewer. And you can do that anytime. We'll get into that as we move forward in the semester. Also, what's getting in the way of understanding the message? There's that noise, right? These questions should be part of your toolkit as you move through the semester, and Chapter 1 is going to get into those. Make a mental or physical note of these. They're really important. I think the bigger picture here as we start to wind down our episode and continue to think about the Super Bowl is that this weekend, the Super Bowl, is the clearest example of media that we get. But all of the things that are happening are kind of happening to you every day. It's not just the Super Bowl, right? Throw the Super Bowl out for a moment. You wake up every day swimming in mass communication. Every day, from the moment you open your eyes. The phone you checked this morning, that's mass communication. If you stream music on your way into school or work, mass communication. The algorithm that decided what showed up in your feed when you were scrolling or doom scrolling, that's mass communication. Think about all the trends we just discussed, right? The AI companies advertising, the weight loss drugs that are flooding the Super Bowl ads. Those same companies are targeting you through your social media feeds every single day. It's not just the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl just makes that spending more visible. We have a start and end date when we can say, oh yeah, they spent X millions of dollars during the Super Bowl to reach you. But they're doing that every day. And this fragmentation that we talked about, especially related to the TV ratings, that's your life, right? It's your life. You're watching different things on different platforms than the person sitting next to you. We're all fragmented. We're getting different messages through different channels, different gatekeepers with different types of noise. So the difference between someone who understands mass communication and someone who doesn't is the difference between sort of swimming in this sea of information and drowning, right? I don't want you to drown. I'm hoping this class is a life preserver, or at least those like cute little floaties that you wear on your arms, right? And maybe you got a doggy paddle. The hope is that this either helps you doggy paddle, or better yet, my hope is that you actually learn to swim. We're not going to escape this deluge of information anytime soon. But our brains are literally not wired to handle it. So we learn about it. We try to understand it. We try to piece things together. And that's the intention of this class. Okay? A couple of reminders for those of you in the Journalism 200 class. As I mentioned, read Chapter 1. That chapter is called Media, Culture, and Communication, A Critical Approach. Discussion. You're going to start looking at your personal media habits this week. Yo, that might be kind of scary. All right, you might have some eyebrow-raising moments, but we all do. I do. I doom scroll before bed. Terrible habit. 100% admit it. Jump into that discussion board. Make sure you do so by 11:59 Pacific on Thursday. Respond to your peers by Sunday. We also have Quiz 1. Quiz 1 will cover, in part, this very podcast. It will cover the reading I just mentioned, and it will also cover current events. Bet your bottom dollar there will be some sort of Super Bowl question on there, all right? So this week especially, the textbook and the podcast are designed to work together. The textbook kind of gives you the framework we're talking about, and then the podcast here is designed to give you context, examples, so on and so forth. Same thing with the discussion, all right? So next week, just a little hint at next week, we're going to go way back to the beginning, to what I call the OG mass communication, the original communication, mass communication, which was books. Yes, remember those? Books. We're going to talk about those a lot next week and how print culture made possible the world we currently live in. All right? If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. We have the Ask Me Anything board out there. Email me, so on and so forth. I do hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks so much for listening to Media Mac here. I'm Dr. Shermak. Take care of yourself and those around you. So long, everyone.